Welcome back to another episode of Carla and Crystal's Real Tea. We're so glad to have you here. After last week's episode of talking about the messy in the middle part, seems to bring up another factor.
Have you ever wondered what happens when the deal does not make it to settlement?
And I think that would be an excellent thing for us to talk about today. Hi, I'm Carla.
And I'm Crystal.
And we're real estate agents in Mooresville, North Carolina.
Welcome to our show.
So if you are interested in real estate, behind the scenes of real estate, maybe if you're looking to buy or sell a home or have ever owned a home, I think that you'll find something interesting in this show for you.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right, I guess we'll start with understanding the impact on buyers.
Yeah, I feel like everybody naturally thinks about the buyer when they think about terminating the contract, because in North Carolina, our rules say that a buyer during their due diligence time period can back out for any reason or no reason at all. So that's really different than if you come from another state, and it can be really scary part of the transaction for everybody waiting to see if that's going to happen.
Right.
What are some of the reasons that you think ultimately leads to a buyer terminating?
I would say the most common is usually from one of the inspections.
Yes, I would say that, I don't have a percentage, but if I were guessing, 95% of the reason that buyers terminate a contract is due to something they found out during the inspection and you were not able to negotiate your way through it.
Right. And sometimes even if the seller is willing to make some repairs or come off the price, sometimes it's just a little too much for the buyer. And I had a recent one where there was nothing really terrible all along the way, but everything just kept piling on top. And they just lost confidence, or they lost they became more afraid to go through with it than to terminate.
Yeah, I mean, because people start to think, is this a sign?
Right.
Like, is somebody trying to tell us that this is not the house for us? Because what are the odds that this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen?
Right.
And I think it can get very scary and intimidating, and they just lose confidence in the house that maybe this wasn't the right house for them. So now it's not the right house. Everybody knows that, and they want to terminate their contract, which is absolutely within their right during their due diligence time period. And now comes the financial implications of that.
That's right.
Yeah, because they're going to lose.
They're going to lose due diligence money. They're going to lose all the money they paid for the inspections. They're going to lose if they're getting a loan, they've already paid for their appraisal. Most likely, they paid a fee to
an application
fee to the lender, and that can add up.
It really, especially depending on the price point of the home and how competitive it was, the due diligence fees that are negotiable, but that we're seeing in the current market, that's really hard for a buyer to walk away from. And then once they do walk away from that and they've lost that money, then it's so hard for them to want to re-engage, because now the theory of what could go wrong, it's not just a theory, they've seen it happen.
So their lesson they learned, they've lost some money, but they've also learned the value in the money that they spent.
Right.
You know, my clients that just lost thousands of dollars, she said to me, she said, I could do a commercial on how important those inspections are. And she's just so thankful that she did a septic inspection.
This is the most recent one,
yes.
I think, where they did end up terminating, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that is just the reality of that whole process. And it's the reason why we have a due diligence process in North Carolina. It's exactly for this reason, because you find out things, and while we all want everything to be rainbows and unicorns, the reality is that some houses don't work out like that, and you have to cut your losses, and you have to have a good advocate who knows how to tell you this is
Right.
not the right house for you for these reasons. And then they support that decision.
That's right.
Because
That's
the
right.
last thing you want is someone trying to talk you out of backing out of a house when you know in your heart that this is not the right deal for you.
That's right. That's not what our role is. We're there to guide them and help them.
I would never ever try to talk somebody out of backing out of or terminating a contract because there's something in there that's telling them that this is not right. There was the one time where it became a bit challenging whenever I had a buyer who went under contract with her dream property. It was exactly what she was asking for. And in the end, in less than 24 hours, she had decided that this house would not be the right house for her cats. And that's one of those times where you think, maybe I want to try to come up with some alternative options for you here versus losing $8,000, which is what she lost in the time period of 24 hours because she had already paid and a contract already said she owed due diligence money. And that one was a hard one. I would say that was the only time I was like, I really think we thought about all the cat circumstances in the house. I feel like we really put them into the forefront. But I guess, again, that's sometimes we don't understand it. It's not our decision.
That's right.
It's not our
That's
decision.
right.
My decision is to just, let you know the repercussions of your decisions and to guide you with how to do that. But ultimately, it is not my decision or anybody's agent's decision to make for you. And we have to represent your wishes.
That's right. It's our job to make sure that our buyers understand the contract and understand that they can terminate for any reason or no reason.
So no reason is sometimes the most interesting reasons of all.
Did you tell the other agent that it was about the cat sappiness?
Yes, because that was ultimately what my client wanted me to let them know. And so because sometimes, the truth is sometimes just the truth.
Well,
you can't, but I know you'd be like, it hurt the seller's feelings. Maybe they don't understand about that.
Well, it could be helpful to them when they put it back on the market.
There was nothing they could have done.
That's right. That's right.
And that's what I think we wanted them to know is that ultimately your house is wonderful. There's nothing you could have done. I just
changed their mind.
Yeah, I just changed my mind for these reasons.
Well, I was trying to go through, and I even looked back in some of the files to try to remember some of the fall throughs and what the reasons were. And I remembered you had a buyer that terminated because she got diagnosed with cancer.
Yes, and that was a really tough decision because they really did like this house, and it was a really great house for them. They had hired designers already to come in and talk about the changes they were going to make. They had already had their inspections, and then ultimately, though, finding out that she was going to need the treatment that she needed, they just decided that was really where all of their focus and energy needed to go, and not on the energy it takes to buy a house and also to sell a house, because they were also going to be doing that.
It just took all the wind out of their sails. Can you imagine? It's such a stressful situation with just the real estate part and having this major medical thing go on. That would be.
And that was something it was absolutely the right decision for them to do. There was nothing that I could have done to make that any easier on them. Buying and selling houses is a stressful part of your life, and they really did need to focus on that. And I'm so glad they did. It had a very happy ending for her. And also, as we always say, there will be another house. And for them, when all of the health portion was solved, there was another house. It was an amazing house, just the same. And I think that's what sometimes people often, when they get the wind knocked out of their sails, is that there's always another house. It may not seem like it at first, and you may not want to jump back into the murky waters of purchasing a home, but it will be okay.
Yeah.
And on the flip side of that is how a termination of a contract really impacts the sellers.
Yes. Again, the sellers are aware when we go over the listing agreement with them that the buyers,
They have this time period.
that's right, that it's not necessary, they don't have to go through with it. That's what the due diligence period is. We talk a lot of agents talk a lot about the amount of due diligence money and the period of time, but we don't take it a step further to what happens to them if this person terminates, if the buyer terminates.
Because you'd like to think, I have had buyers in the past who thought, well, that's just part of the selling game. They knew that somebody could terminate. And I guess it is part of the reality that it could happen, but nobody wants to dwell on that when you first find someone that has fallen in love with your house. There's a contract, it's amiable to all the parties, all the terms are good, the negotiations are good. You just want to focus on the moving forward part,
Right.
and everybody's happy. So no one wants to go into this thinking, oh, well, they could back out.
That's right. And the first few days or weeks on the market is such an important time to get an offer in and go under contract and then it come back on the market. That's a whole different market.
The way a house is perceived after it's gone off market and under contract, and then it comes back on market, it's like a huge kind of gray cloud sitting over the house that is just, I mean, it's a hurdle we have to overcome, and we will be able to overcome it, but it is a stigma that's attached now that makes for an additional, I have to explain why the house
Right.
came back on the market. Was anything wrong with it? Was it a negotiation problem? And I think that that's very difficult for other buyers to perceive when they're looking at a house that's come back on the market. The first thing they say is, what's wrong with it?
What happened? Right.
Like, there must have been something bad because the house came back on the market.
We've had when there's multiple offers and lots of interest in the property, sometimes when a buyer wins the bid or wins the house, they immediately get cold feet and think, oh, I paid too much, and back out.
Yeah. They got in the game and they were all excited because of the negotiation, and everybody wants this house, and so they're moving so far fast to just win it that afterwards are like,
there were 43 offers and I won. I must have really overpaid.
yeah. But for that seller, so you're like, now they get that due diligence money because the buyer has walked away. In most instances, I can say that due diligence money actually did not compensate for what they went through.
Right.
Sometimes it's just a crazy amount, but for most cases, when a house goes under contract, and let's say in today's market, we've negotiated a 30-day closing, possibly 45 days, but in order to accomplish that, a seller has to get on the ball quickly.
Right. They have to have somewhere to go. They have to pack. They have to, if maybe they're looking for another house, sometimes they have to find another house.
They maybe have to do repairs for something that somebody has asked for. And so they're trying to facilitate all of this. They're downsizing, so immediately they start selling off furniture. And so now imagine you're under contract, you sold half your furniture to downsize, you've got the other half of your house in boxes in disarray, and all of a sudden now your house has to be actively marketed to the public again in that condition. I tell my buyers, if we can at all help it, do not pack a single box until after due diligence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something we have to consider too when you're looking at the due diligence date versus the closing day. If you have due diligence, 30-day due diligence and then close 35 on day 35, that won't work. You've got to give those sellers time to be able to do
all the things
that they need to do.
Yeah. So I like to say, like, even sometimes we'll try to negotiate a lease back for the seller so that then they really didn't have to pack anything until after the deal was closed. And so that works out really good if we can do that sometimes. But I just think that often we don't understand what each party goes through as far as how that is impacting them. You know, we're only looking at it from however the side is that we're on, like I'm the buyer, so you know, you're thinking about all the money that you just lost and how that house wasn't right, and now you've got to start all over, and that is unfortunate. But also from the seller standpoint, like it really is a gut punch to have to start all over and with the house in whatever condition and it's in. And that's really hard for them too.
And trying to do what they can to make sure it doesn't happen again. But you know, sometimes it happens more than once.
Yes, I have had houses that have gone under contract twice and then fell out of contract for the same house. And interestingly enough, there was nothing wrong with the house. It was just two unfortunate situations. And I've had buyers that have had to go through that same situation. I think the most important thing that we can do for our buyers and sellers is to really talk to them about the fact that this could happen and make a contingency plan for it.
Right. That's the same. We talk about it all the time. If our folks are prepared, if it's a surprise, it's devastating. I mean, it's hard enough anyway, but if we prepare them for what could happen.
Right. And I think sometimes the hardest part is when somebody has to, sometimes buyers and sellers, they somehow have formed a bond in this part and they like the person, either the buyer or the seller. And it genuinely like hurts their heart to have to say, like, I have to terminate this. Like, it's not personal. I need to terminate this. And I think that's sometimes hard, or sometimes when maybe the buyer and seller actually know each other.
Right.
So that can also be a very difficult.
Well, and it's hard it's hard sometimes. If I use the same example of the one most recent, those sellers, I was not working with the seller, but they tried really hard. They did everything they could possibly think of, even to say, what can we do to make this work? So the buyer felt bad. You know, they did, like, you know, they're so nice, and they were nice, but it wasn't really about that. It was something that this person has to, a house they have to live in for the next, 15 years, 20 years, however long.
I think on my most recent termination, it was tough because I knew that this buyer was never going to get that opportunity again. It was a very good opportunity for them, but the timing just turned out to be off. I did feel incredibly bad for those sellers because they had offered to do anything that had come up, anything that came in the repairs, they were willing to fix. I think they probably would have renegotiated our price. They were willing to renegotiate on our time frame. So they were really trying, and they wanted this to be successful. And so I felt bad that it wasn't. At that point, all I could possibly offer was to say, if you need me in the future to say, this was not a house problem, this was just simply a buyer whose plans change, I will certainly go to bat for you. I think it's great when we can make good relationships like that to protect each other and buyers and sellers as a whole, so that when we're all working together, because it doesn't have to be a disaster.
Right. Well, just the two examples that we're speaking about, it's also a reflection of how our market has changed, because we had sellers that were trying so hard to make this work when the buyers wanted to back it out. That's new. We've been in such a seller's market for so long. We didn't see that for years. They would have just said next, and now it's changing.
The market that we were in a few years ago, there would have probably already have been a backup contract in place that immediately came into play that protected that seller, because there were so many people vying for a house. It is important to note, in North Carolina, let's say someone does terminate for inspection reasons, we are required to either repair those items that were the problem, or now they need to be disclosed. Right. So it's not just cut and simple whenever something terminates, especially over an inspection. Right. So there's not much We don't really have to do much when it comes to appraisal issues, except for a very few loans that it has to be disclosed, or just somebody walked away for whatever reason. But when it comes to terminating for an inspection issue, that does become something that just does impact the house moving forward, and impacts how the agent and the seller disclose those things.
Right, and the seller would be more motivated if it's a repair issue to make the repair rather than have to disclose it.
I think that that's one way we can help buyers and sellers avoid termination, is by making sure that the disclosures are well prepared. All the questions are answered. We're not required, as far as the seller is not required to say certain things on the disclosures. It's important to have that conversation with your agent. But the more information that you give in your disclosures about your home, the better chance that the first time you go under contract will be the only time you go under contract.
Right. And also to get a pre-listing home inspection is also a good idea.
Right.
So you just put everything out on the table, and if when they make that offer, they know everything you know about the house, then it's going to be less likely that something unexpected will come up.
It won't protect you from the cats, but it will protect you from most situations.
Right.
And I think that is the best way that we could probably facilitate buyers and sellers from falling out of contract, is just with better communication about the process and better disclosure about the property. And then after all that, and their expectations. Yeah. And then after that, though, to know, like, it's not the end of the world.
Right.
As my mother-in-law would say, this too shall pass. It really does. It looks incredibly bad while you're like in the thick of it. But in most circumstances, I will say, I don't think I've actually ever had a time that it didn't work out for a buyer with another property that was better for them.
Yeah.
And in terms of a seller who's had that, it really depended on the seller's situation, and did they move forward with the best of intentions, like make the repairs that were needed, adjust their expectations about what maybe the purchase price should have been.
Right.
And then I can see them having a successful outcome as well.
Right. And I can't think of any that did it, that went back on market, that did it sell.
Especially not in this market.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's a momentary setback in the process, but you can get through it. Okay.
That's it.
Well, I think this was a good talk about what happens when the sale doesn't happen, because that's the reality. And once again, we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing anything that you would like to know about in the future. Bye.